Now, at last, I'd like to ask our one of our other moderators to return to the stage. Please welcome Debbie Millman.
Are you having fun? Good. I'm going to do another interview, and I'm going to be interviewing Forrest Young. Yeah. Just a tiny little bit of background before I take a deep dive into Forrest's life with you all. Forrest Young likens his career trajectory to a desire path and suggests that desire paths emerge as shortcuts, where more deliberately constructed and prescriptive paths take a longer or more circuitous route. They have gaps or they're non-existent. From Arctic ice to electric cars, Forrest has worked as the global head of Rivian. He was the first ever global chief design officer at Wolff Olins and a senior creative director at Interbrand, where he worked with some of the world's largest tech brands. He's a critic in design at the Yale School of Art and a past board member of the New York chapter of AIGA. Please join me in welcoming Forrest Young to the AIGA stage. Forrest, you're in your signature yellow and black.
I thought I would go for Big Bird. I was feeling Big Bird this morning.
Now, is it true that you started painting and drawing at 3 years old?
I did. My uncle Chuck took me under his wing and taught me the ways of line and contour. I drew a lot of fish and a lot of T-Rexes.
Any particular reason why?
I think I like those little arms.
You come from a family of artists and painters utterly comfortable expressing themselves in form. And looking back on your childhood, you've said that you took the number of artistic people around you on a daily basis for granted. Why is that?
I think if you are familiar with something and something feels like I'm a fish and I swim in water, like this is the natural state of things. It was only later that I realized how incredibly lucky I was to be around an environment like that where expression was so free and celebrated. And so I think I looked at professional trajectories as something that had to be different, something that had to be more challenging, something that had to be not water.
One thing that I discovered in my research that you said that I found really compelling was that when something comes naturally to you, you don't always understand that it's significant. And I'm wondering, given that you said that, if you can give me a little bit of an understanding as to how you came to that conclusion.
I think it's, I played a lot of sports early on, so I think I approached things a little bit with an athletic mindset, which is that you can only get stronger if you have some form of resistance. And so I think I always looked at trajectories that involve some form of friction or resistance or challenge as those are the worthwhile opportunities. And so I think in doing that, which is good sometimes as a catalyst, sometimes I overlooked things that were more subtle, things that came naturally, that saying, oh, your gift isn't screaming in your face, but your gift is just something that you're just doing, like walking.
You were born in Pacific Beach, San Diego. Wow.
PB
a lot of you out there.
PB is not here.
You moved east to Cambridge in the late 1970s and early 80s. Your mom was not only doing graduate studies at Harvard, she was also employed at Atari during the heyday of the Atari Cambridge Research Laboratory. What kind of work was she doing?
So my mother was pioneering ed tech before ed tech was a thing. Her work environment was so exciting that I would oftentimes pretend to be sick so that she could take me to work and I could be exposed to all these people playing with robots, playing movies on laser discs, which I had never seen before and most people hadn't, And ultimately, I was exposed to an environment, similar to your earlier question, of people actually experimenting through play. And I think it was that exposure of, to be bright doesn't mean you have to be serious. You can also approach serious things through play.
Were you as technically comfortable as you were artistically?
I think I became very, very technically comfortable, but I think it was all because most of the things involved me playing with a turtle. I don't know if anyone is old enough to remember the turtle from Atari. We had a turtle robot, and we had a turtle that you could give basic commands like forward 90 and back 30. But ultimately, it was technology, but through the lens of something that you could play with.
Despite the number of people in your family with artistic talent, most didn't pursue that talent as a vocation. And you said that while everyone expected you to have a relationship with your creative side, they preferred that you pursue a profession that was more in line with being a doctor or a lawyer. Is it true that you started at Cornell pre-med?
So I had 3 majors at Cornell. I was pre-med, which many people find very difficult to believe. But ultimately, I thought back to a lot of the classes that I took in high school. Many of you had very, very boring math classes. Jack has 2 apples if a train leaves the station. And when I realized that medicine or science is very artistic, organic chemistry, how things combine, and I think because science and math are not taught creatively, they're not seen as pursuits where people who are maybe more whole-brained, pursue them. And so pre-med was my attempt to bridge those sides of myself. But also, to your point, I think I also underappreciated, one, the importance to the world of a fully realized person, which I think is embracing your own gift, but also creativity and the structured hope embodied by the things that we do is so needed in the world, just as much as saving someone's life through some type of medical intervention. Sometimes, just walking across the street to this hotel and seeing that wonderful hope sculpture is just as important for someone.
It's so interesting to think about science and math being taught creatively. Those were 2 subjects that terrorized me. And I can't imagine what my life would have been like if I was taught those subjects differently, given how fascinated I still am well into my 60s now, where I love to think about science and the possibilities that exist around us. Who knows what my life could have been like if I was taught in a way that allowed me to actually learn as opposed to resist and fight and cry. Little drama there for you in the morning. It was rough. I mean, I remember struggling over writing a paper about a grasshopper. In any case, separate stories. Before you went to Cornell, I know you also considered going to the University of Chicago to play football. So talk about that. Were you considering becoming a professional athlete?
Yeah, so I went to University of Chicago and had a bunch of wonderful conversations and talked to the football coach. And I think I was like, oh, well, University of Chicago's, Jay Berwinger, some famous people have been Maroons, if there are any Maroons in the audience. But ultimately decided that starting in hospitality initially was much more interesting. And it felt so bizarre to think of myself as a hotelier.
Well, they have a very prestigious program at Cornell in hospitality, yes. So that makes sense. But I also can't envision you at the front desk here at the Sheraton.
Yeah, I would, I'd maybe be a cuter version of that.
Of course you would be. You ended up with a hybrid dual degree in human development and fine arts. What were you envisioning you'd do with that degree?
I was actually thinking of either going into palliative medicine, which I thought was just such a wonderful blend of the limits of what you can do with medicine and also just care and empathy, and also potentially art therapy. So I was thinking that bridging the idea of art being also a form of medicine.
After you graduated, you worked on a number of, oh, what a great ringtone. After you graduated, you worked on identity and web design projects, but you also had a pretty big pivot and started studying theater. What motivated that choice?
I think I was really, really struggling after 9/11 to rationalize myself studying for the MCAT. And I thought to myself, what is your own personal bucket list? What is the one itch that if you could go back, and even high school where you're a 3-sport athlete? And I was always curious about the drama kids. I was like, they always seem like they're having so much fun. They always seem like they're so free and so gregarious. And I thought, I should just throw myself into studying theater. I should get an acting coach. I should learn. I should just do the bucket list things because you're never guaranteed an extra day. And so I threw myself into acting, which ultimately I highly recommend for designers. I think I learned more from doing scene studies and acting than I did for probably 70% of my design courses.
Why is that?
I think, one, it's about listening, and it's about a life or death struggle to get what you want in a scene. And so there can't be any kind of muddying actions. It's a very, I'm going to choose this action and I'm going to go for it. And I think all great design has a certain kind of precision and confidence to it. And there's ultimately like a meta-narrative that you're aware of, like the arc of a play. And I think that's like, okay, I'm working on this particular moment, but it's within a much larger piece. And so to question, what is the overall narrative arc of the thing that I'm working on? And so I think that, for me, was natural coming from acting.
Yeah, I think how you show up and represent yourself and your ideas is really as important as the ideas themselves.
Absolutely.
You got really, really serious about theater, and you started studying with what you've referred to as incredible enthusiasm and rigor. And then you considered going to grad school to study more formally, and I'm wondering if you could share the story of how you chose which graduate school to go to and what subject you ended up studying.
So I probably had one of the most memorable auditions for the Juilliard School of Drama. You're supposed to do an original monologue and a prose monologue, and they warned me, don't do an original monologue. And of course, when someone says don't do something, you of course do that thing. So I thought, how could I go wrong with Oprah? And so
Did
I
you just
took
say Oprah?
Oprah. And so she had just released a book. Her hairdresser had released a book, called like Oprah Talks Hair, and it was all about different hairstyles and going chemical free. And so I did a chapter adaptation of the chapter called Chemical Free as a monologue about rehab, and it did not go well.
Why on earth not?
And they remember going through and they go, August Wilson, all these, it was like, I don't understand, like Andre Walker, is he a famous playwright? And I was like, oh, he's Oprah Winfrey's hairstylist. And they were like, wow, that was an audition that time we'll never get back.
I kind of wish we had enough time for you to do that with us today. I think we should ask for that in the evaluation forms. Now, from what I understand, even your choice to think about Juilliard came from a Google search. I understand you put in a Google search of what is the best theater school in New York, and Juilliard popped out. But you also were thinking about going back to school for design. And here's where we have an interesting sort of commonality in our histories. You decided to pick Yale as the school to consider going back to. Was it your safe school if you didn't get into Juilliard?
Looking back on it, it's completely idiotic. One, I chose the two most difficult programs based on admissions, I think maybe only third to like the Naval Academy, to get into, and I had no fallbacks. And I applied to both programs at the same time, and my thinking was that they were both so impossible to get into, and also doing them at the same time, that one would ultimately eat the other one. And whatever one ate the other one, out of desperation or wariness, was going to be the one that ultimately I should do.
If you had gotten into Juilliard, would you have gone?
I think so. I think the amount of terror of going to that program and so much talent, I remember auditioning and seeing like 11-year-olds like doing breathing exercises outside. I'm going, I'm competing with that 11-year-old who's been acting since they're in the womb. I think the fear factor of going to Juilliard might have pushed me to do there, and then I would have had a different course.
Now, when it came time to choose between Juilliard and Yale, you decided to pick Yale, despite whether or not you got in to Juilliard. So you could learn from your cultural hero, Paul Rand. But you had a misconception at the time about Paul Rand. Believe it or not, I had the same misconception about Paul Rand.
Wow.
And until I saw that you had it, I thought I was the only person in the world who thought this way, and I've never told anyone.
That's amazing.
Tell everybody what we're talking about.
So I had a terrible, terrible summer job at Cornell. It was working in an un-air-conditioned library in Sibley Hall, and my job was to take all the dust jackets off of the books. And I remember seeing this monograph of Paul Rand, and I remember taking out the dust jacket and looking at it. And I remember my father was very close with the late Kwame Ture, also known as early Stokely Carmichael, and civil rights hero. And he looked just like a young Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. And so I thought, oh, with a side profile, looking out, possibly inspiring freedom rides. I was like, Paul Rand is an African-American cultural hero.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
I thought the same thing.
I was like, wherever he's going, I probably need to go.
And when I found out he was white, I was really bummed.
I found out during my interview at Yale.
Oh, yeah, tell us about that.
And they said, so in your application essay, you talk about having such commonality with Paul Rand, like really kind of understanding his lived experience. And I'm just wondering, and then all of a sudden, I remember it was Scott Stoll, and he stopped. And then he realized that I didn't know that he wasn't black. And then I realized that I got it all wrong, and I'm within the Paul Rand Center of Graphic Design at Yale. And I just absolutely froze, and I was like, I'm not getting into this program. I'm mortified. My whole essay is absolutely comedic at this point. And both of the interviewees had to fight from laughing hysterically because they didn't want to crush my spirits, but they thought it was the funniest thing that had ever happened in an interview.
This is why I'm glad I didn't apply to Yale. But I felt such a kindred spirit with you because I didn't go to design school. I learned almost everything I've ever learned about design from reading books that Stephen Heller has written. And so I just felt such a kismet kind of beshert moment when I realized you thought that too and didn't feel so alone in the world. You got into Yale. And at that time you thought it was your responsibility to be the African-American presence there. What kind of presence were you hoping for?
I think one of the things is, and first of all, the panel earlier was absolutely exceptional, and I think touched upon a lot of the things of, for me to feel a sense of confidence in doing what I'm doing, I have to understand a different historical trajectory, but also a different relationship, to form making that is, my own lived experience. What does it mean to have a different lived experience, and ultimately, how does that translate into, my own expression? And so I really felt like that's both a responsibility, but it was also an urgency. It was also, how do I survive in this program, and ultimately survive in the world?
You began your career working with a grad school colleague, the sculptor Tavares Stratham, who is now a MacArthur Genius and an art star. And you said that this first professional experience was formative for you. In what way?
Well, I think I was really disappointed, not in anyone in particular, but in my class. And I think there's been a lot of the themes, at this conference, which are actually the students actually have the answers and the teachers may not have the answers. And I started to feel like my colleagues were losing the confidence in what they had figured out in grad school, that they were going into agencies or environments where they were going to be lower down on kind of the tier, and ultimately, but they wanted the cachet of working in a place. And so I thought, how do I resist this? And so I asked around beyond the designers to other people, what are you doing after school? I'm going to New York. Where are you going to school? I'm going to New York. New York, New York, New York, New York, New York, New York. Okay, that's great. Where are you going? The North Pole. Sorry, what? Yeah, I'm going to go to the North Pole, and I'm going to cut out a 5-ton block of ice and try to figure out how I can get it to, how I can FedEx it to the Bahamas. And so that was my first job.
What did you learn?
I learned that ice is very sensitive. Ice is very heavy, but ultimately ice can be magical for people who haven't seen ice at that scale. And ultimately that ice, something as simple as ice, could actually be a gift.
I was just in the Arctic Circle over the summer, and I've also been to Antarctica, and ice can tell the story of our planet. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary thing to behold. You went on to work at Frog Design on design language systems, Interbrand on fast-moving technology accounts, West as an embedded startup practitioner. You then worked at Wolff Olins, where you became the first ever global chief design officer. Most recently, you worked at Rivian, an electric vehicle manufacturer and outdoor recreation company, where you were global head of brand. During these experiences, you were the recipient of every major design award, including the One Show Gold Pencil, the Gold Design Lion at Cannes, and the ADC Black Cube. You're a wonderful audience. I was hoping if I just paused a second before my question, you'd applaud. Thank you. Forrest, how would you characterize your career at this point?
I think that it is running in a straight line, trying to feel a sense of when something is feeling like too easy or too difficult, to try to be mindful of that kind of inner landscape of, is this what you're meant to be doing? Is this challenging? Also, how do you keep learning? And if you don't feel like you are actually learning, as difficult as it is, as terrifying as it is to change course, you're going to have to change course. Because I always feel like if we're not continually learning, that's where you kind of cease to be a human. So ultimately, that's how I think of my career.
You've had a lot of ups, a lot of success. But when I was doing my research, I discovered in an issue of AIGA Ion Design that you said that you'd hit a wall with design, and that the more you unraveled, the more you came to the conclusion that design is, at its core, arrogant. By definition, it is telling others what is best for them. Do you still feel that way?
I think unchecked design is incredibly dangerous. I think it's dangerous because it assumes that the client brief, which I think any client brief, how I characterize it, is an invitation for all of us to be futurists, to imagine what is a better future. But it's a better future from whose perspective? From the client, and also what is the agenda of the client? So I think unchecked, it's incredibly dangerous. But I think what we're seeing is to be a conscious designer, to be aware of the larger fabric of which the design exists, can actually be a sense of structured hope versus something that maybe perpetuates, a dark pattern or some type of asymmetry.
That word keeps coming up again and again over the course of this conference. I don't know if it's because it's embedded across the street or because it's what we all need to be feeling right now. You go on to state in that same article the following: had I not experienced 2020, I would still be living in Harlem, recovering from crisscrossing the country the last few years, operating in autopilot. I would be looking for a kind of life resolution from conventional avenues and channels. I would not have been given this near blank canvas to reimagine what a life could be. I'm wondering, it's been a few years since that article, and you've really repositioned your own life. How have you colored your blank canvas since then?
I think the gift of 2020 is ultimately asking the question, what is worth designing for? And I think I would not be in some of the places, in some of the rooms, in some of the conversations had 2020 not happen. It was incredibly painful. It was incredibly isolating. I think we're all still healing, from that particular moment. But ultimately, it was an incredible gift to basically say, one, as a memento mori, you're not guaranteed to live another day. Two, there are a lot of people in pain. How to truly understand how to feel more of that pain, to both understand that your solutions may be one-dimensional, but ultimately that all of that pain is also a gift. It's also an opening. It's also a way to see the world from a different perspective. And then the more voices you take in, the more plural that you're looking out at the world, the more that you become more dimensional.
You presented on the main stage at the 2019 AIGA conference where you talked about the parable of partial truth and how it leads your design philosophy. I want to know if you can tell us more about that parable, what it means when it comes to design, and if it is still part of your design philosophy.
I think it's one of those things, I think it was an accidental Google search, again. That's another
You and Google.
That's another thread. I think I was maybe looking for an image of an elephant. I don't know why I was looking for an image of an elephant, but an image came up of an elephant that was being essentially like fondled by 6 men, and I thought, what is this image? And I remember opening this up, and it's an ancient parable of the blind monks that encounter an elephant, and they're all trying to discover the true nature of this elephant. And so there's a monk that's touching the legs and saying, what we have here is a tree trunk. Another one is touching the trunk and saying, what we have here is a serpent, a boa constrictor. Another one's touching the body and saying, we have a giant boulder. Another one's touching the tusk and saying, we have a spear. And one's touching the tail and saying, we have a fan. And they all start bickering. And it's supposed to be a parable of the peril of partial truths. But ultimately, had they stopped arguing and been more conversant, they would have been able to stitch together that what before them was actually an elephant. And so I always think specifically now that we're seeing more and more specialization within design, there's a danger to see through the lens of the trunk or the serpent or the fan or the weapon, but not understand of how to understand that we're addressing an elephant and the beauty of the true shape of the creature.
In that same talk, you discussed how critical curiosity is to design and suggested that we not question what we're curious about. And that seems easier when you are as established as you are. If you're curious about something, you have the ability to sort of go anywhere, see anything, do anything. How can young designers learn to listen to that curiosity rather than to the competing cultural forces around them, which actually suggests that you touch that part of the elephant or that part of the elephant?
I think it's one of the things of finding your own voice, your own way in design is what you're curious about is it's an amalgamation of all of your lived experiences. I'm curious about it because I don't know anything about it. I'm curious about it because there's something enticing or seductive about it. Curiosity is a validation of your own lived experience. So ultimately know that things that you're curious about are a validation of all the things that made you, you. I think Michael made a similar point, about Maya Angelou. And so it's ultimately what a gift that what you're curious about ultimately points you towards what can be affirming for you as a person and how you navigate design.
In Maurice Cherry's great podcast, Revision Path, and for anybody that might not be familiar with that podcast, please start listening immediately. You shared that currently only 3% of professional designers identify as Black. And you went on to compare this figure to the 13% population estimate for African Americans from the most recent US Census. What are some of the biggest challenges Black designers are facing now in the wake of the 2020 protests and the more recent pushback against racial reckoning?
I think it's a necessary conversation, but ultimately there's one of the things, obviously you just can walk around New York and understand that there is, and Rick and I were just talking about this the other night, there is elite design and elite practice where you're saying that 3% is taken from the rarefied condition of having passed through the specific gates of these programs. But ultimately, there are so many people doing things that could be classified as design. So ultimately, though that 3% is a bit disarming, but one of the things that I look at those statistics of 3 versus 12% is just a lost opportunity. A lost opportunity to dimensionalize what we call our profession, that it's an obligation to, whether it's safety, like Self-driving cars, are we training the AI on people of color? Because if a steering wheel can't see the driver, then the car can't self-drive. So we can actually take this to outcomes that are actually quite perilous, and you're creating death machines by not understanding how diversity is not only an urgency in terms of us and our shared humanity, but it's also potentially dangerous. And so I think there is an urgency that we should all feel that those types of outcomes, what is the AI being trained on? Is the AI being trained on technology from the military, in which case it's getting really good at recognizing certain types of faces and not other types of faces. So it's our obligation to start to question, not only to say AI is going to take our jobs and be afraid of it, but also the urgency to train AI with a more kind of prismatic, set of conditions.
Forrest, we are tragically out of time, but I do have another question for you. You've written about how demographers estimate that by 2045, the collective BIPOC ethnic group will overtake white Americans as the minority majority, a new majority with rising political and economic influence. And by 2050, Black power will extend beyond a revolutionary ideal to become a potent reality. That sounds great. I think we should really be excited about that, but that's too far away. How can we make this happen faster?
I think one of the things that a lot of people have spoken about is just the importance of representation. It seems like it's overblown or it's overly mentioned. The ability to see yourself as a practitioner is so incredibly important, to be able to even imagine that you could do it. The lesson I have from my own very embarrassing Paul Rand story is that there was some part of me that desired to bridge towards what he was doing as a practitioner, and I misinterpreted him as a likeness to myself. And so ultimately, I forced a representational moment that didn't exist. And so I think we can all understand the importance of inclusion from a perspective of each moment that someone glimpses, that's me, I could do that. That's a seed that's planted, a seed of a professional idea that they can argue with their parents. Oh, I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer, I want to be a designer. And you can say, because this person's a designer, this person looks like me, actually came from our neighborhood, and is actually making more than a doctor.
Forrest, it just occurred to me that anybody looking at the most successful practitioners of design and branding today, all those young kids looking online, will be able to see you and see themselves in you. Thank you so much for being here today. Forrest Young. All right. You have a break. And then you have lunch and book signings and breakouts. See you back here at 3 o'clock.
So if there's something you'd like to try, if there's something you'd like to try, ask me, I won't say no, how could I? Coyness is nice, and coyness can stop you from saying